What in the heck is up, guys? It's Jacob here, and welcome to your third Arduino tutorial. Alright, so in this tutorial we're just going to kind of explain the structure of the Arduino code, because we kind of already explained the Arduino itself, how to install the software, and how to load up your first code. But before we actually dive into making our own codes and just being creative and typing up our own codes, we have to know sort of how it's structured and what all this stuff means here. So, I mean, even though you may be familiar with C code, this is not, it doesn't reflect C code exactly. In a standard C++ environment or a C environment, you would have something like int and then main, and then that would be the function, and then this would be your function right here, and then all your code would be in here, and this is where it would run all your code is in the int main function. You could have other functions, but your int main is always going to call those functions, right? So in Arduino, you don't really have the int main. It is there, but it's all in the backend files, so you don't ever deal with int main itself. So Arduino is actually made up of two main functions. You have a void setup and a void loop. So what happens is, in the void setup, this is pretty much a function that runs once when your Arduino is initially started up. So when you start up your Arduino, this function is ran one time, and then it moves on to the void loop function, which does just as it implies, and it loops everything. So what is the difference, and why would you want stuff to be in here rather than in here, or in here rather than in here? What's the difference, really? So let's just say, let's make a simple program. Let's go back to that blink program. We'll write that over again, and we'll explain it in great detail, sort of why things are where they are. So if we create an int, and I'm going to call it LED like I did before, and that's going to be equal to 13 for the LED pin on 13. So this is just an integer, a variable right here, named 13, or given the value of 13. Okay, now you're going, well, why did I declare this out here rather than oops, rather than in here? Because I forget this is Arduino and you can't just drag code. You have to actually copy and paste it. So why would I put it out here rather than in here? Well, because just like any C code, when I'm running anything outside of the actual function, I can use it in all these functions. If I were to just put it in the setup function, only the setup function can use this integer, and the loop would not be able to use it. So that's why we declare our integers before our setup loop and our void loop. We do not declare it inside our functions. We declare the variables outside the functions, typically. So then what we have is the setup. Now this is something that's going to run once, and the Arduino uses this to set things up. So this is something like the pin mode function, right? Where you would say LED, and then we're going to declare it as an output, okay? Now the reason this would go in here is because when we start up the Arduino needs to know, well, pin 13, is that an output or an input? It needs to know how that chip is going to be ran, what the pin-ins and outs are going to be on that chip, what they're going to be used for, You can't just start it up and say pin 13 and start writing information to it. You need to know whether it's an input or output. That's what that declares. And this needs to be declared before you can actually make a loop function, because your loop function is going to use pin 13, but it doesn't know how to use it if you don't tell it that it's an output or how to use it, right? So you declare that once. Now, why wouldn't you declare this outside of the setup function? Well, because this is something that needs to be declared once, and it's a setup. It's actually setting up how the Arduino runs. It's not a variable that's going to be used by all these other functions like this up here. It's just something to set up the Arduino and tell that chip how to run, really. And then why wouldn't we put this in the void loop? Well, that's because, the loop just goes over and over and over again, and it just loops around, and you don't need to tell it every time that LED pin 13 is an output. It knows that. As soon as you declare it once, it knows that the rest of the time it's running, pin 13 is going to be an output. You don't need to loop that and keep telling it every time you run your loop that pin 13 is an output. Okay, so then there's the digital, the digital write function. I always screw this up. Okay, and then we can say digital write LED high, and this is gonna tell that LED, that pin, to go high, right? And then of course we have our delay for seconds, and then we'll just kind of copy and paste all this, and we'll put this one low. So what this does is, it does, like I explained before, is it loops, it goes through the whole thing and then it loops back to the top. So this is what continuously runs non-stop. You can also declare startup things like in the void setup. So I could put the digital write high up here, or digital write low, so that when the board starts up, it starts out with pin 13 low, right? So that it has initial values. So you can put like initial values and stuff up in your void setup, and say that when the Arduino is setting up, start it at a low, start everything low instead of starting it out high. And then your void loop function can change those values once it starts, right? But the void loop is what runs over and over and over again, and this is where a majority of your code's going to be. This is what's going to actually be the function that your Arduino does. This is going to tell this function how to run, how it does it, This is going to be setup information that this function needs to run in order to properly function. So that's pretty much it. Most of your variables are going to be declared outside of the function at the very, very top of the code. Unless it's a local variable that you want to define inside the function for some weird reason. We'll get into those later. There are specific reasons why you would want to declare a variable inside a function, but for now, you declare your variables up at top before your functions, and then your setup has just setup information, and your loop goes all the way around and just keeps looping around the whole time. So it starts out with the LED high, it waits at the 1 second, 1,000 milliseconds, and then it turns that LED off, waits 1 second, and then it goes back up and turns it back on. So that's all it does. And you can have, obviously way more advanced code in here than this, and it would just keep looping through. So that's pretty much all it does, guys. So I just want to kind of explain the setup and the loop and integers and how that is kind of all structured and what it all means. So hope you guys enjoyed this quick little tutorial, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Like always, guys, have a good one.